Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. So, today we're going to be reviewing the Brat era. We're going to be reviewing the small fat era more specifically. So, when I'm talking about this is particularly from a place of being super morbidly obese or very, very big. And then when you get to this small fat phase. So, a lot of it will have more to do with that than just being small fat in general. But we're going to go through this little note that I wrote down, and I'm going to just talk about everything that I learned in this era. I'm going to talk about the challenges I think a lot of people will face within the small fat zone and how to get through it, how to get past it. As there's a lot of differences between like being morbid or super morbid or, like just kind of higher up. The first thing I will say is this era is a lot less defined by health. So when I talked about my tortured Mo era, that was very physical still. The physical parts of it were still very, very loud. And it was something I had to talk about the differences between super morbid and morbid. And it was a huge part of it. What I will say physically for this phase is that it's a lot better. It's drastically better. It's so much better that it becomes more social. So there's still challenges that are social challenges within this phase. And there are still some physical challenges, but they're not as much, which I do talk about the physical challenges in this little, kind of gag definition of Obratsity. So I'm just going to read it. I posted this back, I think, in like November or October or something like that. It says, Obratsity, noun, a medical term. The state of being in lower levels of obesity while in a deficit, characterized by low dopamine symptoms, thrill-seeking, moodiness, slightly elevated estrogen causing feelings of drunkenness, tiredness, and soreness from the gym that is similar to having been living hard or partying. Greatest obstacles include low motivation and constant whining. Suggested treatment: don't sleep, don't eat, just do it on repeat. Keep bumming that weight loss 365. May require appropriate amounts of sugar and or caffeine. Reflections of the Brat era, the small fat era. So yes, that's what I will say as far as physically. That's typically what you're going to find. So I do think there are kind of a lot of whiners in this zone. And I think it's because it's easier to whine because it's not so bad. Like there were times like when I was super morbidly obese, it was so bad I could barely tell anybody it was that bad. So when you're in this phase, it's like easy. But it also has to do with the actual like the focus and the way of getting through it, which I will get into. So let's go ahead and get into it. Reflections of the Brat era. By the way, I mentioned sugar and caffeine because those increase dopamine, but also apples do too, remember? I'm not even kidding, they do. Reflections of the Brat era. Okay. Health becomes less of a concern and doesn't define the era. So I already kind of touched on this. This is big because I think that the previous eras, they're so heavily focused on physicality. Even for Tortured Mo, it was very mental, which I talked about. There was a lot of mental work, especially coming from a very big size, especially coming from an E followed by the letter D legacy. There was a lot of stuff that I had to do in Tortured Mo to work through mental triggers constantly and continue on. And there was just so much energy that went into my mind during that time because when I was super morbid, I couldn't really focus on the mental health aspects very much. I had to be extremely physical and I had to just get out, basically, because it was that difficult. Like there was no other efforts really other than getting out. So if you are super morbidly obese, you need to just focus on the physical aspects and work with your body and get out. So it's tough. And I've talked about that a lot. So we're not going to focus on that as much in this video. But what happens when you get to this zone is, if you've done the work, which I would suggest doing the work, I would not suggest like losing weight in isolation and never doing anything as you're losing the weight. I don't suggest it. I think it makes it really unstable. But let's say you have been, then by the time you get to Brat City, or like that small fat zone, it's kind of like you've already been through a lot of the stuff. And so social concerns come in a lot more, and you have more of like a younger quality to you because you feel better. So that's why I would say, like, really from small fat, the mids, and thin, it's a lot more social than physical. There's still a lot of physical aspects in obesity in general, but it's not nearly as strong as it is from a super morbidly obese perspective. I don't know how many more times I can say that. It's different. So the first thing that I noticed when I was becoming a small fat is this scandalousness. So I called it on the channel, I called it being the albatross, which that's a song that it's about scandal and changing perspectives. And I think that this will happen to almost anybody who is super morbidly obese and reaches a small fat zone. So what happens is basically you reach a point where people are really shocked at how much weight you've lost, and people do not, like, there's a sense of disbelief. And in that disbelief and awe, there's also like a feeling of scandal. And it can feel very scandalous when you lose that weight and you get to that point, because people are like, oh my gosh, like people talk about it a lot. And especially coming from a more mid-fat zone, which in my opinion is the invisible fat. That's like when you're very invisible. It's like that 2 to 3x zone for most people. When you get out of that, it's very jarring, because all of a sudden it's like you're back online. It's like, whoa. Because so much of, like, for me at least, Tortured Mo was so introverted. It was so like reflective. This era isn't like that. And I wouldn't suggest that really. You know, I do think there has to be some reflection within morbid obesity, because you have to deal with like your triggers, and you have to like reflect on like the big changes to like your daily routine and lifestyle. That's where a lot of that stuff happens, is in that morbid phase. And it's really important to focus on that stuff. In this phase, it's more like you have to think of the phase, as I wrote here, as a phase of movement. So it's kind of like when you're hit with this scandal of being a small fat, where it's like, oh my gosh, then you have to kind of pick a lane. So I wrote that here. You have to pick a lane, demure or brat, due to huge social pressures. In my opinion, small fat is peak social pressure. You have the most pressure at that time, in my opinion, in the whole journey. I think just because it's kind of like you're arriving to the party, but you're arriving late. It's kind of like you're people on all sides of the spectrum look at you and they judge you. There's like a scrutiny. And so most people that go through this phase, they feel the need to pick a lane. So what do? If you feel a lot of scrutiny coming out of nowhere, then you have to either be demure, so you have to either live up to that scrutiny and do what is expected of you, if that's more natural to you, if you're more of like a people pleaser type, or you're just more logical or less emotional. It's probably easier to just wear a smile on your face and just kind of go through the motions. Think more Sabrina than Charlie. You know, it's still that espresso energy of like, I'm working late because I'm a singer. It's like, I'm working late because I'm a small fat. You have to still kind of carry that with you. But I talk a lot on this channel about this aspect, the brat lane, in terms of small fat, because this is really important because I don't think it's talked about very much. I think most people that do lose weight, they're of a more demure mindset. And especially when they're doing social media and they're talking about it, they tend to be more like happy and cheerful and a lot of the things that are expected, which there's nothing wrong with that. I don't judge people for living up to the pressures of being a small fat. I just could not. So I was like, oh, I'm going to have to be brat. And I think a lot of you guys, especially people that struggle with EFOD by the letter D, you may find yourself having to be more in a brat mode during this time because there's a lot of emotions in weight loss. There's a lot of emotions in people that have EFOD by the letter D, and in a lot of cases, not all cases, but in a lot. And a lot of times, a feeling of needing to rebel can be a trigger. So you have to allow yourself to rebel against these pressures. And it's really important. I feel it was very important in my activism, especially in retrospect. It was super important to show that lane, show that way of doing it, because I don't think I've ever really seen it. And I think it's important because for a lot of us, this lane is really all we could do. Like, you can't live up to, you can't be perfect. You know, I couldn't do it. You know, I just couldn't. So I think that part is important, is to show that there is another way. You don't have to have the smile on your face the whole time. You don't have to be super rizzy. You don't have to have all your emotions held together all the time to lose weight. And I think that was important to show. So I wrote here, brat is for the very emotional and rebellious. We often don't have a way out as most don't talk about it. Demure Rizzy, aka like a Sabrina, an espresso lane, is for a more calculated, logical type of person, in my opinion. It's for somebody who's like, I'm just going to go through the motions and whatever. Like, I don't really feel anything about it. That's great. But on this channel, we talk a lot about EFOD by the letter D. So if you have that, if you struggled with that, brat is more than likely going to be your lane. More than likely, which is why it's important. Anyways, regardless, within long haul weight loss, you have to think of the phase as a phase of movement. So remember, we're either 365 party girl or we're working late because we're a singer. It doesn't matter. I know this is really gay to talk about it this way, but I know a lot of you guys can understand what I'm saying. And I think that's all that matters. So when you think of it this way, think of small fat as a phase of moving. The reason why is that low dopamine and motivation is the biggest struggle. So if you stop, then you're really likely to give up. It becomes really, really hard to start again, or you lose all motivation. It's kind of like you become like a shark. You have to move to breathe in this phase. If you want to get out of obesity, period, you have to keep moving at this point, because you get lazier. You really do. And it's not necessarily just like who you are or whatever. It is genuinely low dopamine. Low dopamine becomes a major aspect of this time. Because really, in the previous phases, so in like tortured mo, super morbid obese, in those phases, your health is so bad that it's enough of a motivator. You're very aware of why you have to lose the weight because it's a constant presence in your life all the time. When you're obese, there's a lot of times where you feel okay. You don't feel sick. You feel kind of fine. You're not necessarily thriving. You're certainly not as good as you could be, but you're kind of like, okay, it's comfortable, especially compared to past phases where it's extremely uncomfortable and horrible for the most part. I'm just being real. So with that, for you guys who are in a bigger phase, know that it does get easier. It is going to get easier. However, oftentimes it takes a lot of people to get to this point, to get to the small fat zone, and they're tired. So they want to stop. So my best advice, the number one rule is to keep moving. Even when I physically burned out towards January, I posted daily. I kept moving. The daily posts helped me keep my dopamine up. You have to find ways to stay active during this phase. It's super, super, super important. I think, honestly, staying active can be the difference between getting out of this phase and not getting out of it. It's super, super important. So like I said, pick a lane. You can be 365. You can be espresso. It doesn't matter. I don't judge. But either way, you're working late and you're going 365 all the time. You don't stop. Just do it on repeat. Don't sleep, don't eat, just do it on repeat. Anyways, you just keep going, okay? So for me in particular, especially I think coming from that E followed by the letter D perspective and coming from a super morbid obese place, this was a time when I felt younger. So I had a lot of like more kind of like adolescent type of feelings or things that were kind of buried from a long time ago, like when I was the same size again, which that may not happen to everybody, but for me, I think for most people, you do feel younger. So you just feel healthier, you feel younger. And so I used it as a time to reflect on who I was before I was super, super deathly ill towards 2020. So I really tried to reflect on the past, especially like 10 years ago, like my early 20s and like just things like that. And things just before my health got so bad, it was important for me to reconnect with that because I think that this is more a phase of separating who we are from the illness completely. I think that did start as I approached, as I got an identity crisis when like my thyroid was not so bad I was going to die, basically. I didn't know how to live with myself after that. It was crazy because I was just completely focused on it. But when that was done, I think at this point, it's like I still had like a lot of symptoms of health issues. And I think in the Brat City phase, it was more like, let me separate the health issues from who I am, from who I was when I wasn't sick. Let me reconnect with a healthier version of me and see what was there. So I think there can be a lot of past work that can be done during this phase. Because remember, we're always active. We're always cooking on this channel. We do as much as we can with the time that we have because we want the weight to stay off. So part of that is protecting your recovery and protecting your weight loss through mental work that is still necessary even in this phase, even if it's not as much as tortured Mo. Okay? So I wrote here, facing root causes. So thinking about, especially if you have E followed by the letter D or you had it, thinking about where it came from. Thinking about the deep past, where it started. It can be beneficial in this stage. Yeah, thinking about where the E followed by the letter D problem came from can be beneficial in this stage rather than constantly battling triggers in tortured Mo. So I think when it's not so fresh all the time anymore, then you can really look at like, okay, this is what happened. This is why I had this. And I'm sure you guys will remember I did a video where I talked to my mom and we talked about the heritability of E followed by the letter D. And we talked about like triggers and trauma and things of why it happened. So that genetic basis as well as the trauma basis. And really, in my opinion, for me, I feel like I got peace. Yeah. For me, I made peace with the past. And it is through reconnecting with those roots that I found my confidence again. So I think that can be really, really helpful because after the tortured Mo phase, it's hard to feel grounded because your body's so different. and your lifestyle is different, and just a lot of stuff is different at that time. And so when you get to this phase, it's good to kind of like, I think for most of us, we weren't super morbidly obese in childhood, so we can think about that, or like even in our teenage years, or stuff like that. It's like you can kind of connect with that, with the last time that you weren't that big. And I think it's really helpful. I really, really do. Because it kind of gives you a starting point. Because while I think that this phase of small fat, it's more about separating the health issues from who we are. The mids, which is where I'm headed, the mids is more about separating fatness in general from who we are. So that's like a totally different thing, which I'm currently working on. I'm currently cooking. Okay. But I just kind of want to talk about the difference between the two. So, let's see. In so much of the journey, we are thinking about what others think, and we are very insecure. In this phase, we can start to let go as that social pressure comes to a fever pitch. So for those of us who are more rebellious, rebellious, I think that it's important to get our courage back, get our fight back, get our confidence back. I think for me, I was very mega bitch and kind of confident and stuff before I started losing weight. And when I started losing weight, there's a lot of hormonal shifts that occur. There's a lot of changes that occur. It's difficult to be confident during that time. And I think especially coming from E followed by the letter D, because there's certain brain changes. Your brain is kind of fried from it. So it makes you really, 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 really unconfident as you're losing weight, which a lot of fat activists they talk about, where they're like, I become so boring. I become so awful. I become so this when I'm losing weight. It's because their brains are fried from the E followed by the letter D. And when your brain has to recover, it's difficult. It's really difficult. You don't really feel confident anymore. So this is a phase where you can kind of get that back a little bit. Especially because the social pressure, it gets to a high point. And so for me, being brat as I am, feeling that social pressure, I was like, okay, I'm not going to listen to this at all. Basically, like I'm going to listen to this even less. But it becomes like you listen to it so little that you don't even really have to talk about it anymore. Or like make a show about fighting against it. You know what I mean? Because in my opinion, genuine confidence is not always having to explain yourself. Because it's like, it's just different. It's just very different. So that's something that I really worked on, and I do feel like I got it back during this time. Okay. Expectations of a small fat. So I want to go ahead and cover this just for anybody who's really introverted and maybe doesn't understand, or kind of socially awkward, or maybe doesn't pick up on certain cues, or just wants to know what to expect if you are getting to this. The first expectation you're going to have is being super, super nice. So when you are small fat, there is a stereotype and a connotation of being kind of like the funny fat friend. Like you're small enough to where you're more mainstream, so you're more involved in a crowd. But it's also like you become what should be the funny fat friend, which again, brat can be a lane for you. It can work. It can be a thing. It works within this lane. So that way you don't have to be super nice. Because for me, I'm not. So it was really difficult. The pressure to be so nice. Like I literally had to be at least a little nicer. A little bit. And I was like, oh my God, it was really hard. Because otherwise people will look at you like you have 2 heads or 3 heads or whatever. Like they'll look at you like, just like, what? It's just a lot. So I had to kind of tone it down just a tiny bit. And I didn't really tone it down very much. Like I'm not trying to be real, or I'm trying to be real with you guys. Like it's not like I was so nice, but I wasn't, I held back a little. I'll put it to you that way. I held it back a little. So the next thing is that kind of scandalousness, right? So people question if what you're doing is healthy. So this is a huge thing that comes up in this phase, especially if you were super morbidly obese, but maybe even in general, honestly, with the way the climate is at this time. But people worry about if you have a restrictive E followed by the letter D. I had multiple people question if I did. Not in a bad way, not in an insulting way, in a concerned way. Um, so it's something that comes up. And I think people in general are like, there's a scrutiny there where it's like, And this is another thing that you'll see a lot from the public. So from like probably more social circles and stuff. People worry about your commitment to the process and are constantly expecting you to regain. So this is a Brat concept of sympathy is a knife. No, I'm just kidding. All this small fat privilege is a knife. But that kind of like, some people want to see you fall. Some people are concerned that you're going to fall again. So it's not necessarily always negative, but there is a worry about it. People see that you're committed, but they worry if that commitment will last. And I think that that's something that you may feel. Again, there's a lot of scrutiny in this phase. I will say getting to the mids, there's less. So there is relief on that end too. But yeah, that's a part of the scrutiny. Are you going to lose the weight all the way? Is this just a phase? Is this really happening or what? Right? So, and that's kind of hard to live with throughout most of the phase. Like honestly, the whole thing. So this one, you are closer to people. Social barriers of weight break down significantly. You are more relatable, but with relatability comes an expectation to act normal. So this can be really easy for people that are more demure. People that are bratty, it's difficult. It can be a rough process, and there's basically zero grace. Okay, so if you do anything, someone will be like telling you. And you can't really waste your energy fighting the whole time. It's not smart. It isn't smart because you better be going to the gym. You got to be doing the deficit. You got to be like, keep it moving. Keep working. Keep it busy. Keep yourself very, very busy during this phase. So you don't have time to sit and argue with everybody all the time. So you have to choose your battles wisely. And you need to be as normal as you can be, basically. I'm sorry, brats, but you have to be at least a little bit more normal. You're going to have to. Because you can't be constantly fighting with people all the time. Like, you just can't. You don't have time for it. You just don't. Okay. In many cases, health improves dramatically compared to higher levels of weight. And it can be a major temptation to stay in this zone because it's easier to maintain. It's easier to just maintain than to keep going. This is huge. This part too. It's not a dramatic social role shift from super morbidly obese. So a lot of people stay here to still be fat in their identity. It can feel very comfortable. This is, in a lot of ways, it's a comfortable phase. Even with the scrutiny, even with all these things. Like, I think a lot of times super morbidly obese people, we have a lot of limits in our life. Okay? So it can be tempting to keep that social scrutiny as a limit because it can be too overwhelming to have too much freedom. So you may want to be at that kind of lower status to keep people on your ass so that you're kind of still like limited. Because a lot of people, they get caught up with limits and they can't let go of them. And so it's very comfortable. So like I said, you can still be the funny fat friend. It's not a dramatic shift of social role. So it's kind of like you can still be mostly who you were with your friends and stuff. It's not that different. As you get towards the mids, and then it does become different. So then it's another ballpark where you don't have that lane anymore. You have to forge a new path, which is what I'm doing now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's hard. But I'm just saying, this is why a lot of people stay. You don't want to get stuck here. That's important. It's still unhealthy. You are still obese. and in some cases still morbidly obese. So remember, these are more social categories. So some people are morbidly obese and they're small fat. I was still morbid at the start of it, pretty much. So yeah, rough. I think it was before I coined Brat City, or like before I started the era, but I became a small fat in August and I was still morbid. And how did I know? Because people saw me differently. And how do you know people see you differently? Because everybody sees you differently at the same exact time. And it just happened again. That's how I know this is done. Because it just happened again. In, late January, February, that kind of zone. It just happened. So I'm like, ugh, I can tell it's happening again. So we're done, Okay. I got out of this era. Okay. Stillness is not something I would advise for the small fat era and low dopamine ranges, and it can be super easy to give up. That's the thing too. There's a physical basis in your laziness, or a physical basis in your lack of discipline or wanting to quit. It's low dopamine. So this is really, really important because there is a physical reason, and it is caused by obesity. So you have to lose the weight to get out of that. I know that's hard, but it's tough. And again, I'm not necessarily talking about ADHD and stuff like that, but if you have ADHD, being obese makes it drastically worse. It will be much worse. So, but even if you don't, you feel that way sometimes because the dopamine is so low. A lot of the time, it's brutal. It's really brutal. Okay, but this, I think, because a lot of people, they want to depend on that social scrutiny, that's where this phase of small fat, that's where a lot of people want to, they want to go to a trainer and be told to, do this. They want, that Julian Michaels approach, and they want people to yell at them and stuff because it helps them get motivated. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think don't get addicted to that and don't stay in it. Don't allow that to keep you there. Go. It's okay to leave there and get out. Notice how much I'm talking about you need to get out. You need to keep going. You need to get out. You need to keep going. I keep saying it because a lot of people won't want to. That's the problem. It's a kind of a little bit of a trap because it's easy. It's kind of easy. It's so much easier than previous phases. It's so much easier. And you're kind of just I'm working, I'm doing so much, I can do so many things, this is great, da, 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 da. But you got to keep going. You just got to keep going. Okay, stay in motion. Yes, so this is big. Throw perfectionism out. So if you are a brat, don't worry about being demure all the time. If your hair is messy, it doesn't matter. You guys saw me on here. My hair was a mess. A lot. If the clothes aren't perfect, who cares? Don't give a shit. Keep it moving. Keep it going. Keep it going. Keep it going. Keep it going. Don't focus so much on these little details. They don't matter. People have less expectations of you anyways, especially if you are taking on that brat lane. That's a part of it. You could even be like, yeah, I'm kind of bratty, or I'm rebellious. I don't know. You can kind of even say things like that to kind of lower people's expectations a bit. So that's what I had to do to survive socially during this time because it was rough. It was really hard. I think this is a harder phase for people who are not people pleasers. This is a difficult one. I have a feeling the mids might be harder for people pleasers. This phase is really hard if you're not. It was really hard socially. I was ooh, it was tough. So, like I said, have that bratty attitude so you can embody it. It doesn't matter because it can be funny. You can make it humorous. Humor is your best friend. Again, you already have that funny fat friend trope. You can totally go for it. You can totally use it to survive socially. It's totally a lane. Use it. If you don't have this is important. This is more internal. If you don't have the perfect feelings about weight loss, who cares? Just keep going. Let the next emotion flow through. So this is really important. You keep it moving, keep it moving. So it's like, I feel sad. Oh, I feel sad. Then I feel happy. Oh my God. It's kind of bratty, you see? So when you're super emotional, I'm mad. Oh, I'm really mad. You just let it all shift. You let it all move and move and move and move and move. And it's okay because it can be kind of funny and it's not like so out of control like in the other phases. Like I would be so angry or so depressed or so, all these things. Like it was so difficult and it was a lot. It isn't really like that. Like when you're sad in this phase, it's just kind of like, I'm just kind of sad. Like it's more cutesy. It's like a cute sad. So you don't have to like hide all your emotions from people. Like they're probably not going to be that intense for most people. It's not that big of a deal. Okay. Just keep moving. In many cases, if you have lost from a small size, you already have routines. So that's a big thing. Rely on them. So yeah, I would not think as much about the physical aspects because you should already have that framework if you started from a very big size. So do not worry. Don't be afraid to push yourself a bit more as you are likely less delicate than in earlier phases. So this was big for me to keep going to the gym, push myself with work, push myself with YouTube. Like I pushed myself because I wasn't as delicate and I found that I could do it most of the time. The vast majority of the time I could do it. With the gym, I had to take like 2 week-long breaks. So I skipped like basically 2 gym sessions the whole time. It was not even bad. So just keep it moving. You can probably handle it. It's okay. Some practical things. You go through sizes faster. So after you, at least in the US, there's a huge difference between a 3X and a 2X. It's drastic. It's like 100 pounds. It's a lot of weight. It's like, think of it as like an 100-pound difference. It's a big difference. Once you get to 2X, 2 to 1X is so much less. 1X to large is so much less. Like, so you go through clothes faster. This can be a phase where it gets a little bit more expensive to lose weight because you have to buy clothes a lot. So I wrote here, don't be afraid to thrift. Again, if you're Brat, embody the Brat. It doesn't matter if the clothes are perfect. You just get what works. You keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving. This is important too. With each pound that's lost, you lose a lot more size. So in my like feeling of it, it's kind of like 1 pound now is what 3 pounds was when I was super morbidly obese. So it's very drastic. It's a huge difference. Okay. And then here, due to a further reduction in calories, you may need more diet culture foods to stay on track. So you may have to spend money on less calories sometimes. So there were times like where an example of this, like I had to buy pickles. Pickles are like basically very low calorie and they can be kind of expensive. They can be like, $4 or something. In some cases, like it can be kind of a lot. And I didn't like it. I didn't like having to buy pickles. It pissed me off, but I had to. So it's like sometimes you're going to have to buy things that are kind of diet culture-y because you have less calories to work with as a small fat in this zone. So you might have to buy the stevia sweetened whatever thing that's less calories, but it costs more. Like this is where weight loss can cost a bit more money, is really from this phase on, because you have to invest in clothing and you have to invest in certain foods like that at times. Like I said, pickles is a great example. It's like, and a lot of people, it'll be different stuff. Like they'll have to like buy lean beef instead of just beef and it can cost more. It's like you have to kind of think about that kind of stuff. So be prepared for that on a practical level in this phase. And here we go. We're reaching the end, y'all. Lastly, the hardest part. The era has to end. This is the biggest thing. It's hard to end it because it's comfortable. And it's so much better than the other eras, but I think we have to continue. We have to think, okay, but what's next? And you have to drop the label of fat. So once you reach the point where you start getting that social feedback, things are changing, then you have to let go of it. you have to stop with the label. Because for a lot of people, that's really, really hard. A lot of people never let go of it. I don't think that's good. I think you need to let go of it at a certain point. So once you're getting to the end of the era, then you have to kind of start deciding when you're not fat anymore, basically. And when you're headed into the mids. So, which I will just say to start with, I do support mid-size as a term because I think it's important for people to divorce from the fat label. And you have to at a certain point. And I think it's better to have a nice range to do that in rather than this idea of like, I'm fat one day and I'm thin the next. I just don't think that works. I don't think it's good because I think it's helpful to get rid of the label of fat earlier. And so that's what I'm doing. So mid-size means you're between fat and thin. So it means you're technically kind of overweight or, you're still on the bigger side, but you're not technically fat anymore. And you don't have that social connotation, which remember, fat is a social construct. It's a subjective word. So it does have a subjective conclusion, and it will be based on your height and all these things. Like most people kind of intuitively understand. But like I said, you can really use that social feedback of when people start treating you differently. That's how you know. Okay? So let me just do some brutal truth at the very end here. Use the power of Brat to smash that part of your identity. And when it's time for it to end, you may find that allowing yourself to just freely feel everything may start leading to problems. So this was a major thing. Because in this small fat era, especially if you're very emotional, it's helpful to just feel however you feel. Up, down, around. Because like I said, they're kind of cute levels. They're not like crazy. It's not like super intense. It's just like, I'm sad. I'm happy. I'm angry. You just kind of go through, and it's okay to do that. But at a certain point, you'll find that you need to start coaching your feelings a bit more. And I'm going to talk about this in my video Wednesday. But I have found that I can't quite allow things to be as freely flowing because some of the ways I'm thinking, they're starting to cut deeper. So I have to be a little bit more careful. So I'm not as free as I was in the Brat era. The other thing is you have to start being more disciplined in appearance as the humorous, funny, fat friend vibes die a fast death. So it dies. It dies a quick death. That's how you know it's done. So you know it because people treat you differently. And people start to expect different kinds of things from you. And it's just a different phase. And then internally, like I said, that kind of allowing yourself to feel everything, it just kind of doesn't help anymore. Like, not that you should suppress yourself, but it's just like, I think at this stage, I have to start trying to be more positive, basically. I have to start framing things in a more positive way rather than it not mattering. It's starting to matter a bit more in the mids. So, yeah. That's basically the conclusion. That's how you know it's done. So I hope that this helped. I hope this helped. I really do. I know this is kind of a lot. This is kind of weird. I know this is probably the weirdest way this has ever been described to you guys. But I really hope it helped. Let me know what you think. And yeah, we're done. That's it. No more Brat. I might still pull out Georgie every now and then. If I'm having a low dopamine moment or if I can't focus, then I will pull out Georgie. Or if I'm just feeling bratty in general, then I'll pull out Georgie. I still have my other stuff too that I use. I just don't use it as much because we're going into a new era. So it's different. But I will be showing you guys that on Wednesday, and I'm very excited. So the life must go on. The show must go on. I think for me, this era will always be special to me because it was when I started to find my sense of humor again And I started to find just myself even deeper, who I always was, you know. And I started to really heal. That's the best way I can put it. It's very healing. Um, Very exciting to not have, like, to be able to live life unencumbered, you know, much more unencumbered than before. And like I never had to stop working, or, you know, like I didn't have to stop anything because of my health anymore. Like that's huge. So it's special. I think it's special to me. I think this era of my activism was important because I was really at the center of the spectrum. And now I'm going more towards the other side. And I think the next phase is also really important because it's when I'm no longer fat. That's the whole point, right? We're not accepting fatness. We don't accept it. We don't believe in fat acceptance here. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to have my confidence back. That's what I can say from this era. So hope that helps. Let me know what you think. I'll talk to y'all later. Have a good one. Bye.